Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs, like Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, which provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership training and mentors. And Journey to Esquire, the blog, which provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com. Hi, it's Jocelyn Hardrick. We're back with another great episode with Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm so excited for our guest. We're passing the mic to Michael H. Scott. And Michael and I are both in the Florida Bar Leadership Academy, which is a great program. I'll put the link in the show notes for those of you who are interested. They take applications every year and they really guide you on how to get more involved in bar governance, which is basically the group of lawyers who manage and regulate fellow lawyers to make sure that we're holding each other accountable, we're giving each other resources, and that everyone's staying on the up and up, because the license is a privilege, not a right, as the Florida Bar likes to remind us. Michael and I met, he shared his story with me, and I'm like, I got to have you on the podcast, Michael. You got to share that story. So let me tell you a little bit about Michael. He's a Florida-based litigation and transactional attorney. He deals in Florida real estate. He's a business broker. He's a Florida certified circuit and county mediator, a Supreme Court qualified arbitrator, and Florida Notary Public. He has experience in first-party property insurance litigation, workers' compensation, residential and commercial property insurance claims, breach of contract litigation, real estate transactions, business organizations and transactions, and contract law. He's a member of the Florida Bar, the Massachusetts Bar, and the Connecticut Bar, like super overachiever, as you can tell. In addition to Florida state courts, he's admitted to the U.S. District Courts for the Southern District and the Middle District and the Northern District. He's a member of the Palm Beach County Bar Association. And like I said, he's in Class 11 for the Florida Bar Leadership Academy. He's also, in addition to being a lawyer, a licensed Florida real estate broker associate and realtor with Keller Williams in the Jupiter area, and a member of the Realtors Association of the Palm Beach and Greater Fort Lauderdale Realtors. So he can help you with buying, selling, and leasing property and businesses in Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Martin County in Florida. And he seeks to create opportunities, synergies, referral sources, network bolstering, and mutually beneficial relationships. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Jocelyn, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and I definitely consider this a mutually beneficial relationship. So I'm happy to be here with you, happy to speak to you, and happy to share some things with the viewers.
Yeah, like I said, you had this amazing story, and I'm like, man, just when you thought like you were struggling to become a lawyer, get your first job, and you hear this amazing story of resilience, believing in yourself, right? Taking big risks, because going to law school involves a lot of those things for a lot of us. And then I failed to mention, you're actually from Connecticut. That's where you got your undergraduate degree and your law school degree. So before we get into how you ended up in Florida, let's go back in time. When did you first think you wanted to be a lawyer?
I didn't decide on choosing to become a lawyer until late in my career. I'd say probably my third year of college or fourth year of college, kind of right when it's getting to the point where it's like, school's about over. I need to get a real job. I need to do something after this stage. So what do I do in the situation? Kind of with my background, I was not going to be a doctor. I didn't have the kind of science background or anything like that. I knew I wanted to pursue advanced education. So I kind of looked at law school as like an additional 3 years for me to kind of figure it out. And it was like, I don't know if I even want to be a lawyer, but I know that if you go to law school, it should open up a lot of different doors. So I like that it wouldn't pigeonhole me in one different direction. I thought that having a legal background could help me go in a lot of different ways. So I'd probably say my third year of college was when I was like, I'll try to take the LSAT and see how that goes. And then so that was my first step, I would say. But no one in
Yeah.
my family's been a lawyer. I don't have any background or exposure to that at all. So it was just it was kind of a first for me. And None of my friends or I didn't have any mentors in that regard. So I think in some situations, not having a mentor can be looked at as a negative, but at the same time, if there's no one doing what you're doing, it gives you that courage and belief that once you accomplish that, you can do other things that no one's doing before you.
Oh, wow. So did you know any lawyers at all? Had you met a lawyer or interacted with anyone in your college or in your community?
No, the lawyers I knew Liar Liar, Jim Carrey. But that was my first like exposure to the legal world. The Matthew McConaughey played Lincoln Lawyer. All of my kind of role models in the legal world were from film. Sometimes they portray them obviously more positive than others, but aside from that, I wasn't bouncing ideas with attorneys or really know what it was like. I liked the idea of I thought it was kind of a well-respected job in many areas of society. I liked dressing up for work and wearing ties and stuff like that. So I thought if I want to do that, I might as well try this lawyer route, which I'd recommend to others as well.
Yeah, I went to law school with people like, listen, I just didn't want to start working yet. So law school is like something you can tell your parents, oh, I'm going to law school. And they're like, okay, take your time. And that's fine. And the good point is that you made is you're not pigeonholed. There's so many things you can do as a lawyer. And just reading your bio, you can see you're checking so many boxes. And you don't have to be a lawyer to do all those things. But what you learn in law school and having that JD really elevates your expertise and makes people think, oh, this person knows what they're doing. So if I want to buy a house, I want to do it from a lawyer because I know they're going to read everything and make sure everything, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. And so you mentioned you took the LSAT. How was it when you were trying to apply since you didn't know any lawyers? How did you choose which law schools to apply to?
I grew up in Connecticut, and I was never a huge fan of Connecticut winters and anything like that. So I was always trying to figure out a way to get down south. So I applied to the majority of the schools were in the Sun Belt region. I was just trying to find warm weather. I was trying to go to school, ideally in Florida. I applied to schools in Texas and Southern California, throughout the Southeast, and the majority of them rejected me based on my qualifications at the time, my LSAT score. So I say I probably applied to 16 or 17 different law schools. I got into 4 or 5. So that helped make my decision for me. One of the schools I did get into was UConn. I got into a couple of other smaller schools in New England, and then I also got into Miami. The reason why I decided to go to UConn over Miami was purely a financial decision at that time. It was, UConn was an in-state public institution. Miami's private and doesn't care what state you're from. They're going to charge you a lot. So because of that, I did go to UConn for my law school, and I thought UConn had a good kind of national brand, as much to do with our probably basketball programs as our academic standouts. So I thought the goal was always to come to either Florida or Texas or Southern California, somewhere where there's warm weather. And I thought if I did UConn for my law school, I'd have that kind of brand recognition that I could go to a different part of the whole country and people would take me a little more seriously than if I said I went to like Central Connecticut State University, which no shade at Central Connecticut State. It's just a lot of people from Southeast Florida haven't heard of that school the same way they've heard of UConn. So that kind of is why I ended up going to UConn, and I had a great experience while at UConn Law. I even probably preferred it to my undergrad.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was gonna say I got into University of Miami too, and I ended up at Florida State for the same reason. I'm like, this tuition is like, there's a reason why University of Miami has a reputation of being where the wealthy go to school because it's just expensive. And it's in a beautiful place, beautiful campus, but we're looking at our student loan debt like,
Yeah, it could
I
be
can get a
worse,
high,
even when you're looking at it
yeah,
now. Yeah.
and you just what you want is high quality legal education, which you can get at a lot of different institutions. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up because that's something people are thinking about. And with all the talk of student loan debt forgiveness, right? Let's start with the front end, right? If you have the ability to lessen it in the front end, then there's less to worry about in the back end. So let's talk about your experience at UConn. You said you had a great experience. What are some of the things you got into and what made it such a great experience for you?
What made it a great experience for me is that I tried to get as involved as I could right when I started going to law school. There was a movie that came out also with Jim Carrey. It's called Yes Man. And he's kind of trying to figure out how to change his life. And then he like basically hypnotized him and put him under a spell. And he has to say yes to every opportunity. I wasn't quite that extreme, but I did kind of want to get involved as I could. What I started to do before I even went to law school was I contacted the library and I got a job in the library probably 4 months before my law school started. I would just go and just do administrative stuff and kind of help push bookshelves around and kind of organize things and set up patio chairs, which kind of seems small in the grand scheme of it. But then I thought that was a huge, by the time my cap when law school started, I was already super familiar with all of the deans and the faculty because I was, bringing them their newspapers in the morning and I was, putting myself out there, and I held that job through the entirety of law school. That was a good job that actually led me to get other jobs because I was working, they saw, I was a diligent worker. I was, friendly with everybody. Everybody knew who I was because I was always on campus. This was a campus that's a satellite campus. It's in Hartford. It's not near stores. So it's disconnected from the undergrad. And the only reason you really go there is for school. There wasn't a restaurant there. There was barely kind of any recreational facilities. And so the majority of people drive to school, they go to their class, and they drive home. But because I was always working at the school, I'd go to class and then I would go somewhere on campus where I'd have to do a job. And over the course of those 3 years in law school, one job kind of led to another, and I was able to just meet a variety of students, a variety of teachers, staff, and that made my law school experience like infinitely better. Just being involved and being comfortable in the different buildings and with different people and knowing them, outside of the educational world, and knowing that, this is just a person who likes to read the Financial Times on Thursdays. So stuff like that really helped my law school experience.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we're going to hear from you is that you're very diligent and resourceful, right? Because I wouldn't have thought to get a job in the library to get to know everyone. But you're right, everyone goes there, and then all the professors usually need some kind of resource. And I tell my students all the time, like, if you're going to ask someone for a reference and I don't remember your face or your name, it doesn't matter if you got a good grade in my class. The transcript already tells them that, right? I need to actually know you and see you outside of class. So what you did was brilliant because everyone knows Michael from the library.
It
And
did
once you
help.
became a student, right, and you did well, so cool. Did you do any other activities like moot court, mock trial, the journals, things like that?
I did. I did moot court. I was a TA for one moot court experience, and that was a useful way for me to get credits actually, because when you TA, a lot of times you'll get credits. It was like a Christmas session in between December, we stopped classes, January, we start up again. There was like a moot court class. It's like an intensive 3-week kind of period for that. During that, I TA'd for it, even though I really don't like the oral advocacy of moot court. It was like an uncomfortable situation for me. I did it because I want to put myself in those uncomfortable situations. You want to put yourself where sometimes you're weak, and you don't always want to focus on all your strengths because your weaknesses need to be developed too. So I did do moot court a couple times as a TA to get those credits. I did not actually do a journal while I was at school. I was working instead because I took on a few other jobs, and I was always kind of working. I preferred work experience to the journals, which I don't know if I'd
So,
recommend to everybody else, but that was just my route.
oh yeah, and we want to hear about your journey, right? So it's not necessarily the right way or the wrong way, but it's the way you did it and the way that worked for you. What are some of the other jobs that you had?
We did have like it was like a gym in the basement of one of the buildings that almost no one used except for me. I go to the gym every single day. It's kind of just a core habit of mine. So I was like, I'm gonna try to get a job at this gym where I have to go to this gym every single day. And technically I get paid to do it. I would check people in, I'd study, during downtime. So that's a job kind of I really targeted when I first got to school. And me already working in the library, they gave that job to me pretty quickly, just because they saw I was resourceful. I kind of knew the hiring director. So I said, when that gym job opens up, please get me into that gym. And so I got that gym job, and then I had a job in the gym and a job in the library. I was starting to see more and more people around school, and I was one of the few people that stayed on school a lot. Because of that, Bloomberg Law wanted me to be their product advocate and kind of compete with Lexis and Westlaw, which are legal research platforms. So Bloomberg hired me to kind of give out Bloomberg stuff to people and let them know that they're another option with regard to them. And then around this time, I was volunteering in a domestic assistance program, just one of those kind of say yes to everything that's options out there. So when I was volunteering for the domestic assistance program, I was able to meet a younger attorney, and she kind of, she took a kind liking to me, and she pulled me in, and I got a job in a law firm my first year too. So for that law school, I was juggling those 4 jobs on top, and I don't think they recommend working while you're a law student. So I was kind of going right in the face of that, and I was like, working 30, 40 hours in addition to full-time student. So I want people to know that it's possible to work and go to law school full-time. You can have a full-time job and be a full-time law student, because there's people out there that have long commutes, or like huge families they have to take care of, and they're still doing it. So I knew that I don't have this long commute, and I don't have a huge family at home to take care of. I can kind of push myself and take on these different options, which hopefully in the long run will help me as a lawyer and as a law student.
Yes, so he said 4 jobs, y'all. And I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is all in the first year of law school." So, yeah, I went to law school with although they told them, "You can't work," they spoke to the administrators that I have to, I had someone who had 2 kids in middle school and high school. We had someone who she was like you, she had 3 jobs. She was working at a bar, she was doing this and doing that, and, they just have this hustle mentality that's a part of them, and as long as you're taking care of yourself and keeping those grades up, that's fine. Again, not recommended, but if you got to do it, then just make sure you're also taking care of yourself. So we want to give that little caveat there. And so now let's fast forward to about, I guess, your 203L year. You're thinking about your first job. What's that process like for you?
I still had that job from my first year. It was in a personal injury law firm. I'd been at that law firm for 2 years at that point, going to my through my 2L year into my third year. I knew that I wanted to try something a little different, so I wanted to kind of think outside the box. I think this was 2014. It was about the same time of year that Brazil was hosting the World Cup. I really wanted to go to that World Cup in Brazil, and so I looked for legal externships in Brazil, and I was trying to find it. I wasn't able to find a legal externship in Brazil, so that goal did not come to fruition. But I did find a legal externship in Beijing for the same time. So during my 2L to 3L summer, I went to Beijing. I worked in like a law firm over there that I thought would kind of push me outside my comfort zone in a way that very few places could. For all the viewers that might be listening, I don't speak any Chinese, which probably doesn't come as a shock to anybody. But that was what I did for the third year, and then I went back to the personal injury firm that I had been at for 2 or 3 years. But around that 3L year, I started kind of thinking like, in the long term, I don't really care what kind of lawyer I become. I just know I want to live in Florida. So that kind of started to change the next plan. And then the decisions I made my third year kind of led me to taking the Florida bar and ultimately moving my life from Connecticut to Florida.
Now, before we talk about how you actually accomplished that, like, what was the legal externship in Beijing, and why were they interested in an American law student coming to their firm?
This was a program called CRCC Asia. It's like I think of a company out of England that sends a lot of students from England to China. They also started doing it more recently with American students. And so they have like externships in finance or economics or every kind of industry. They had a legal externship as well. When I was there, I was doing a lot of just proofreading kind of their English and just to kind of contribute value wherever I could. And then the rest of the time when I wasn't working, I was trying to just survive over there and take like 2 or 3 buses to work and try to memorize which Chinese sign means home. So it was as much of a cultural learning experience as a legal learning experience. But I'm glad that I did it because it definitely transformed me as much as a communicator as anything else when I came back to the United States. Because I used to be a lot more shy and more reserved, especially in like school settings and stuff like that. I was not the first one to raise my hand and not the first person to be called a gunner or anything like that. That was the antithesis of what I was. But when I went to China, there was a lot of times I wanted to say something and get something off my chest or communicate, and I wasn't able to. So when you came back to the United States, all of a sudden you have English and you realize like everybody can understand what I can say. And for the first time in my life, that was new. And to where I would go back to school and I would speak with a little more confidence because I was like, this professor can understand my question. And in the past, I might have taken that for granted, but going to China and not being able to communicate with people like made me a better communicator and a better attorney in the long run. It was a great experience, but I was happy to be back on U.S. soil when I came back.
Yeah, so were you so was an unpaid externship?
Yes, they provided housing and like some meals, so there was a small stipend. I think travel was also included, so I didn't make any money that summer, but it wasn't a huge expense for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so now when we fast forward to Florida, it's going to make a lot more sense. But what was it about Florida that was so appealing to you? I know you got into University of Miami. I know you wanted warm weather, but like you said, you did California, you did Texas. There's other places that have warm weather. What was specific about Florida?
Yeah, so ever since I was probably 10 or 12 years old, I'd always dreamed of Florida as like paradise, and like I associated Miami with just like a great party and awesome vibes, and they had no snow there, no cold weather. I knew that I was going to end up in a southern state to live in, especially when I had a little more autonomy of, where do I want to live, where do I want to start my roots. Because up to this point, I'd lived in Connecticut for 25 years, and as much as I love Connecticut and I love UConn, I knew it was not going to be a forever kind of place for me. But I knew that in Southeast Florida, there's big things happening. There's a lot of just energy and buzz there. So I was like, I want to go there, and I think that the sooner I get there, the easier it'll be in the long run. Because I could have waited and gotten, a little more stable in my career, or even come down later in my life. But I thought I'd have to make that transition eventually, so I might as well do it as fast as I can, as early as I can.
Yeah, I was 25 when I left New York. There's something about that age. You're just like, get me out of the snow. I can't take another snowstorm. That was it. And I left in October of 2005 because it was right before, the heavy winter weather. But I had family here. So I had, someone to like, I just moved in with my mom for a while. And then I applied to law school, went to law school in Florida, which I know you had tried, but it didn't work out. So now let's get to this moment. Like, okay, how do you actually end up in Florida?
Well, the first thing was just taking the Florida bar, which at that point you have to like choose your 3 year what states you want to take the bar, and it would be nice to take them in 7 or 8 or 9 states, but oftentimes you can only take them in one or two. And Florida and Connecticut's their bars were the same day, so it was like you got to pick one or the other. And I was like, "See ya, Connecticut. Sorry, you've been great to me, but I'm going to sign up for the Florida bar, and I'm going to put all of my eggs in this Florida basket." And I took the Massachusetts bar the next day because they weren't conflicting. So that's one reason I took the Massachusetts bar. But that was more of just the secondary thought. And Florida was always the number one goal. All the energy was placed in the Florida basket. And so I did like an online study program with FEMAS. I think everyone else was doing in course or in class assignments with Barbary and stuff like that. But I'd honestly recommend the self study and the online study to anyone who's studying for the bar or considering studying for the bar. I did it completely on my own at my own pace, and it worked well enough for me to pass 3 bar exams with that one self-study. So I don't think you need an instructor. You don't need a class. You don't need to have people to study with you. As long as you know what your purpose is and why you're so motivated to get there, you can kind of reverse engineer how to get there. If I knew I really wanted to go to Florida, so I was able to kind of take the steps backwards and figure out what do I have to do to make that happen, and then I kind of work backwards from that. And the Florida bar was the last big hurdle that I had to have before I could just drive down here and hope for the best.
Okay, so now, did you come down to Florida before you even got your results?
Yes, yeah, I was kind of optimistic at that point. I was like, I took the test. I'll find out in 2 weeks. I should try to get down there just so I have a little head start on my success if I'm successful. So if it didn't work out, I would have been driving around and tooling around for another couple months until I took it again. But fortunately, I was able to pass that first time because that was something that really went well for me. So that was a blessing. But
Yeah, because it's been a rough few years for Florida bar passage rates. And I tell people too, if your why is big enough, the how will come. And so a lot of people taking the bar exam, their problem is they don't have a clear idea of why they need the bar license. So they're just kind of like, sort of, kind of, maybe doing it. And I'm like, that's not going to cut it. But some people who are really not good test takers and things like that, maybe that'll cut it. But if you're really motivated, you'll get there. So you drive down, you said a couple of weeks before the results. And so what meets you when you drive down to Florida from Connecticut?
I was able to befriend a 3L my first year. She was kind of like a mentor to me during UConn. She was a very loud, proud Cuban girl from Miami. So she was the one contact I had in the state and the only person I knew that kind of saw me, I guess, during this path to Florida. And when living outside of Florida, especially in New England and not having a lot of familiarity with Florida, Miami is like the main place that you know of in Florida. You don't even know any other places exist from out there. So I went to Miami first because I was like, that's the only place I know. And I stayed with her for, I'd say, 3 or 4 or 5 days, and she swore me in, and then became an actual attorney. And then I was like, I got to try to find a job at this point and a place to live. And I'm not sure what the geographical layout of is in Florida. So I don't even know if there's bad places or if every place is great like Miami. And so I kind of hit the grindstone, and I started going every single day to just apply for any job. And I'd say I must have got rejected by 600 or 700 jobs. It was like the amount of no's that I got like completely desensitized me to where I would apply for 20 or 30 jobs a day, and then I wouldn't get either a call back or an interview with any of them. And then I get like a random interview or a call back, and it would just kind of be a dud situation. But I still go the next day and I would still apply for 20 or 30 more. I knew that if I did it in that like indefinitely for forever, eventually I'd get a job. Even if it would take, a couple weeks, even if it would take a couple months, like I would outlast everybody else and just keep applying.
Wow, you said 600?
Probably, I would say I really wanted to be an arts and entertainment and sports lawyer, and that's like where I was like really interested, and I thought Miami would be a great place to do that. I must have applied to all 100 of them. None of them gave me an interview or told me they were any interested in me. So then I kind of started pivoting, and I was like, well, I like real estate too, so maybe I'll try real estate. And I applied for 100 or 200 real estate jobs, and everybody loves experience, and I had zero at the time, so I was like almost unemployable. I didn't have like a University of Miami or Florida State or Florida connection where I could say like, oh yeah, I went to Gainesville in 2008, and they could talk to me about Tim Tebow or something like that. So I was coming in like just kind of completely off the streets. I would go door to door, and I would just show up at law firms, and I would drop off my resume and say like, I'm available to work after lunch. Let me know what you need me to work on. I'd be kind of open with them and let them know. Sometimes they were really like that I was looking at my car, and they were like encouraged by that. They come out and like try to see my car because they were just curious as to what I was doing. I'd say that probably lasted for 2 or 3 months, just going every single day to try to find jobs, whether it's in person or going to Starbucks and applying to every job on Florida Law Jobs and all the kind of websites that have the jobs. And I got no takers or anything like that. So
Wow. So I want to be clear, like, because you said it kind of like just you were mumbling. You were living out of your car for 2 to 3 months and
yes.
applying to jobs.
Yeah, fortunately I had a RAV4. It was spacious. It's not the smallest car. And then I also had I had like a computer, a laptop computer, which you can do so much with a laptop computer because you just go into Starbucks and you have the internet, and you can spend 4 or 5 hours there looking up jobs and writing cover letters and refining your resume. And that was like kind of a repeat for 7 or 8 weeks until I ended up doing a document review job, which I found during the search. And I knew that wasn't a permanent situation, but I needed some kind of employment because I wasn't gonna be able to do this forever. So when I got that document review job, I met an elderly woman. She was about 90 years old, and she kind of learned my story and wanted to support me and took me in, and I was able to pay her like a reduced rent. And that was the first time that I had stable housing since coming to Florida.
Wow. What area were you still in the Miami area, living out of your car?
No, I got the document review job in Coconut Creek, like in Fort Lauderdale area, because I started kind of expand my net of looking for different jobs, and I was looking for everything from Miami up to the Panhandle, and I'd apply to jobs in Jacksonville or Orlando or Key West. Like I had no geographical limitations. I just needed a job in Florida, and everybody in Miami, at that point had already said no. So I was like, I'll go to another city and try to like maybe find a UConn alumni or something like that. I didn't end up doing that, but at that point, I kind of exhausted a lot of the Miami bigger firms that really have like a strong University of Miami tie.
Yeah, and that is one of the unfortunate parts of like, getting that first job out of law school. A lot of the ties and who you know is really, really matters. So if you're an out of state person, even if I know people from Florida who went to school out of state, when they came back, it's almost like they were starting again because they didn't have their connections here in Florida. But that's amazing. Talk about resilience. And I'm getting, just like how you said most of the lawyers you knew were from film, I'm getting like I forgot the name of the one with Matt Damon, and he's living in the like he's in Memphis and he's living in the this old lady's apartment, mother-in-law apartment, and I'm getting Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, how they're like
Yeah.
living on the street and he's washing his shirt every day and the sink, because that's the vibes I'm picking up. Is that what it felt like to you? Like you were in a film or something?
Yeah, I think you have to have like a self-belief that just is borderlines on delusional, because there's gonna be a lot of times when no one believes in you, and a lot of people are telling you, what are you doing, like and they're actually kind of like just they're not supporting you in any way. They're not giving you encouragement. They're not gonna like, even if they can't give you a job, they won't like help in any way. And in those situations, I think you need to be that much more self-reliant, because if you believe in yourself, then nothing else really matters. If you have that like indomitable self-belief, like no, another no doesn't change your world in any way. and just like I'm gonna figure out and go as long as I can and as far as I can until I get a yes. And it only takes one yes, even if you wade through a sea of 1,000 no's. That one yes will make it worth it. And when you have that belief, you can find it. If you don't have that self belief, you might quit or you might stop or you might change your plans because it's easy to listen to other people sometimes.
Yeah, I'm wondering because I'm a mom of 2 kids. If my son was telling me that this was happening, I'm wondering what my reaction would be. Do you wanna share what your parents thought or the people in your family? Like, what were they thinking during
Well,
this
I think
time?
in the beginning they wanted me to stay in Connecticut because I had a good job and I had, a good work family there, and it's all I knew. I was only 4 or 5 minutes from my hometown where I grew up. I had a lot of friends in the area, and obviously everybody I went to school with is a Yukon Husky, so I had a lot of more contacts there. It would have been an easier life for sure. So I think they were a little skeptical of me just getting in my car and driving somewhere to where there was no job and no contacts. But I think in the long run that they wanted me to do what was best for me and what makes me the happiest. I knew that like the kind of the challenging route is always the one I'm attracted to because it gives you a much greater reward than taking the easy path and succeeding over a low bar. So I think they're happy now that I didn't because I'm really happy in Florida and I've got a good job, and they've actually recently moved down to Florida. So I think in the long run maybe they're supportive.
Yeah, you were the pioneer of your family.
That was the first one
Who
from
went
Florida. I won't be the last.
Yeah. So let's talk about, okay, so you have this document review job, you're living with this elderly woman who's letting you pay reduced rent. How do you then start to pivot into these other jobs and then, getting all these licenses and things that you're doing now?
Well, I was really fortunate in that there was like a change in the workers' compensation laws that year, and basically it made it easier for plaintiffs' attorneys to get attorneys' fees. So that little change in the law just made them much more litigious. It kind of revived that industry to where all of a sudden now there was a need for workers' compensation attorneys, even junior ones, which I would have been. And so I found a job with a workers' compensation, like a real job, kind of not doing work doing the doc review anymore. My first job was doing workers' comp in West Palm Beach office. It was like a law firm. I went to their Fort Lauderdale office, and they were the top floor, and so I started the top floor and I knocked on their door and tried to get hired. Then they said, "Sorry, we just hired someone last week, but then you can try this West Palm Beach office." And so I followed up on that. The West Palm Beach office brought me into an interview, and then they hired me probably like a month later, which seemed like a really long time. But when I got that call, I was like, "Oh man, I can finally like move out of my car and get like a place and like have a hometown in Florida." And I ended up being in West Palm Beach, which it turns out was like such a beautiful place. I'll probably never leave Palm Beach County. It's just like a great spot, and that job was a blessing. But it definitely didn't come overnight, and it wasn't the first 300 or 400 jobs that I applied to.
Wow. And then, so how did you decide to become like a mediator, an arbitrator? Because you're doing all these different roles and then eventually go back and take the Connecticut bar. What was or what is your idea of your career to have all those little hats that you wear?
Yeah, I think it just comes from always kind of having an expansive personality. As soon as I like get a calm and I feel like I've got everything kind of sorted out, I need to throw something else into the mix, and I need to kind of like push myself to where I'm never quite at the end of my path. There was a couple like loopholes I found, like for instance, when COVID hit, they waived a lot of the experience requirements to become a mediator and arbitrator. And so it's basically you just go to a course, and it's an online course, and it's only open for the 180-day window. So during the 180 days, I made sure to become certified mediator and certified arbitrator. Even if I'm not currently using either of them, I'll hopefully be an arbitrator and a mediator the rest of my life. Same thing with being a real estate broker. I try to advise this to all attorneys. I don't know one that's took me up on this, but when you're a lawyer and you have a JD, they make it easier for you to become a real estate agent. Because I knew it was easier for me, I didn't have to take a pre-licensing course. I basically just show up and take a test. And if I do well on the test, I'm a real estate agent. Because I knew it was like streamlined for me, I wanted to give it a try. And so I passed that real estate agent course. And then I was like, I might as well try to keep going. And then I passed the real estate brokers course. And then now that I have it, I want to figure out ways that I can use it or leverage it. And it's fun, kind of learning new things, and it's complementary to law. But at the same time, it kind of I think makes me more valuable in the long run. So Now when I buy a house, I'm able to do it all on my own as opposed to like going through a realtor, which is fun.
Yeah, I'll take you up on it because you're like the third person to tell me that. And I'm like, maybe this is my sign that I just need to, because I'm really good test taker, right? Read the
Yeah.
thing, take the test, pass. And like you said, I might not use it right now, but I can find ways to leverage it. And again, back to the lawyers, having that JD and that Esquire really elevates your brand so people are more likely to turn to you when you're in these non-lawyer roles. So that's great. So now we're gonna get to the part where we talk about, what advice do you have for new and aspiring law students?
For new and inspiring law students, I would say if you're in law school, you've already done the hardest part. For me, the hardest part was the LSAT, and that part was so demanding and so treacherous. And looking back, that was the hardest obstacle that I had to overcome over everything I've done in the last 10 years was the LSAT. So if you've done the LSAT, you're already in law school, you should give yourself a pat on the back because you're basically 90% of the way there. You're already an attorney. And like the test towards contracts, that's gonna be easy compared to the LSAT. So for the ones who haven't taken the LSAT, I would stress that the LSAT is one of the most important tests you'll ever take. So focus a lot on the LSAT, take a prep course if you need to, because in my experience, I thought the LSAT was as stressful and as hard as the bar exam. So I would, for students around that time, I would really try to emphasize the importance of that test. For students who are in law school or shortly after law school, I'd stress the importance of making mistakes. I think that you have to make mistakes if you want to grow. And a lot of times we're scared of making mistakes or, you know, we try to mitigate our mistakes or look for reasons to be successful. In those situations, you're not going to get the same learning experiences as you will when you get a mistake. Obviously, no one wants to make mistakes a lot of the time, so it's best if you can learn from other people's mistakes. That's why we seek out mentors, we have teachers and stuff like that. You don't want to be, going off the hinges and doing things recklessly. At the same time, pretty much everyone's already made the same mistake that you could make or you're about to make. So if you learn from them, you learn from their mistake, that's incredibly invaluable. And I would always say, if you're not sure whether you can do it or not, just do it. And if you don't do it, if you fail because you took on too much, that's better than not trying at all. So those are the first few things that come to mind. I would say I have a book that I'd recommend to law students. It's not a law book. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's by Dale Carnegie. And I thought that book was, for me personally, more valuable than any law school book I ever read. And I still read that book almost daily today. So that will help you in life. That will help you in negotiation. That will help you more than a course book will, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's one of those classics, right?
Yeah.
Because I used to work in sales. So they always have you read those classic books because everything we do is about building rapport and relationships. And if you can do that first, all this other stuff gets so much easier. And I want to talk about one last thing. We were chatting, and it's beyond my knowledge and wheelhouse, but you were talking about technology and how lawyers can really use that and leverage. And can you give us a little insight into some of the things you're thinking in terms of like how technology and all these things that are so felt so futuristic, like even just 10 years ago, now come into pass?
Yeah, and technology is one of the big things that we talk about in our leadership academy, which we're both in, because whether we try to fight it or not, it's definitely impacting the whole world, including the legal profession. There's been a couple circumstances where I've tried to be quick to use technology, and there's other situations where it's hard to adapt to technology. For me, I've always been kind of a little bit of a hyper guy. I like to move around. I'm active. I've never been bookish or in any way. It's been tough for me to do a career that has so much sitting and so much typing. One of the things that I like to use, it's like a dictation software. Basically, it's like a mic, and this type of technology has allowed me to be an attorney because otherwise might get so restless and stiff that I might consider alternatives to like, increase my quality of life. But with this technology, I basically just say what I'm saying to you. It'll type out entire paper, it'll type out emails, it types out all my billing. And because of that, I don't have to be hunched over the computer. I can kind of be relaxed. I can be moving around. I can still get work done. I can stand up. And so that's a way that I've used technology that has allowed me to stay in the legal profession. Another I guess counter to that is ChatGPT and how we've all tried to kind of use that and kind of maximize how that's moving into society, moving into the legal profession. There's been a couple of attorneys who have abused it in other states and they've kind of wrecked it for a lot of others, including myself, so where my firm has outright banned ChatGPT. So there were situations where they just don't want us to use it in any way, which I have to respect, the firm's policy and my current employer, their view on it. But I see in certain situations where there's pros and cons to technology. So I know that if I was a law student, I would probably be using ChatGPT heavily, unless it was banned by that instructor or that school or that institution. I know my own, I talked to the law school dean at UConn a few weeks ago, and they've kind of had a teacher by teacher, case by case basis on whether they like to use it or not. But I think whether we try to fight it or not, it's coming.
Yeah, lawyers are so risk averse. So one person messed up and was silly about it. Like that lawyer knew better. They were just doing shortcuts, right? We all know if you use ChatGPT to draft something, you don't cut and paste the thing and file it, right? You have to like look at it. And the case you're referring to, the ChatGPT does this thing called hallucinating, where it wants to meet your request. So it created case law that did not exist, but that was exactly on point. And the lawyer, if they had just done a quick search, would have seen it wasn't an actual case, but of course they didn't. And so now they're like, no one uses it ever. And it's like, well, that knee-jerk reaction is, I think, is why the law is slow to catch up to technology, right? But I teach my students about ChatGPT. I have someone who comes in and explains what it is and how to use it. And his whole goal, his name is Sam Harden, so hopefully we'll have him on the podcast. He figures out how to use that technology to help access to legal services because there's a huge gap, right? Like you and I have worked at these big law firms. Most people can't afford our rates. But if it's like workers' comp, like you said, plaintiffs are getting paid from, the workers' comp. So that allows for more people to access it. But what about those people in the middle who have too much money to have legal services, but not quite enough to pay $300 an hour, right? And so there's a lot of potential there if you're looking at it from legal access. It also helps people who are neurodivergent, right? So you're saying that microphone thing technology, that's great for someone who has ADHD or someone who has vision impairment and other things that makes it hard for them to just sit in front of a computer and write out all day. And there used to be this running joke that law firms pay highly intelligent people to do very boring things all day. So you don't have to comment on that because I know you still work at a firm. But I definitely understand that, right? Sitting at a desk all day answering emails and putting in billable hours is not my idea of intellectual stimulation. But sometimes that's what we got to do. So, any last words before we wrap up, Michael?
Yeah, I just want to jump off that last topic. So there's new areas that are constantly coming up in law that you can't plan for, and that are probably opportunities for a lot of, especially younger attorneys. Like for instance, we were just talking about social media and like its impact on the law. And I know that I go to these seminars and we get, you know, addressed about best practices in social media. It's always a younger attorney, someone who's, knows Instagram, knows Snapchat, knows TikTok, knows the ins and outs of them, knows how the messaging works. A lot of these attorneys that maybe have 40 years of experience on us, they don't know how Snapchat works this with the same fluency that we do. So there's always these new areas that if you look for opportunity, you can be, the subject matter expert in something like this. So I know there's lots of ripe areas out there, and I know that it's the next generation that'll find them.
Yeah, I was literally just talking to someone I hired to do social media for me. And I'm like, man, 10 years ago, if you told me this was a full-time job, right?
Yeah.
Social media manager, I was like, I would have been like, what social media? Because when I was in law school, Facebook was just starting to become public. That's how fast the stuff is moving. But that's such a great point. If you're a young person, you understand this stuff and you're interested in it, write about it. Do presentations on it. Work for judges because judges definitely don't know what's going on. They're so far removed from this stuff, but they have cases that come in front of them, right? And they have to kind of try to figure out how that works. And then, like I said, the whole theme with you, Michael, is resilience, resourcefulness. Man, just don't give up, right? If you really believe in something, believe in yourself more than anything, and it will come to pass. So, and thanks for that book recommendation.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Now, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to help anyone in their journey.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to link his contact info and also, that microphone you talked about. We'll see if we can put the link in the show notes.
Sure.
So thanks for joining us, Michael. And we'll see you next time on Journey to Esquire, the podcast.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jocelyn.
Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.